They call it ghostwriting for a reason. It's not just about writing for someone else. It's about becoming a phantom in your own life. You have to die a little bit every single day. Every time you craft a sentence that moves a million people to tears, only to watch another person take the applause, a piece of your soul withers. My name is Elias Thorne. For a decade, I was the most successful author in the literary world, or at least, I was the gray matter inside her skull. My wife, Julianne, was the brand. She was the face the cameras loved, the glamorous, charismatic genius who supposedly spent her nights drinking tea and bleeding ink onto the page. But the truth? The only thing Julianne ever bled was my bank account and my patience. I was the shadow in the basement. I spent 14 hours a day in a room that smelled of old paper and desperation, weaving the complex plots that kept her at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. I knew her characters better than I knew my own reflection. I knew their fears, their sins, their darkest impulses. What I didn't realize was that while I was writing fictional monsters, I was feeding a real one right across the dinner table. We had a deal, a pact signed in the early days of our marriage when we were starving and ambitious. I provided the brilliance. She provided the mask. It was a perfect symphony of deception. It worked until the mask started to fuse with the flesh. You see, when you spend 10 years crafting perfect murders on paper, calculating the exact dosage of a poison, the perfect angle of a blade, the untraceable alibi, you start to believe you're a master of reality, not just fiction. Julianne stopped seeing me as a partner. She started seeing me as a liability, a loose end, a rough draft that needed to be deleted so the final version could shine. Because ghosts, you see, are only useful as long as they stay in the shadows. Once they start wanting to breathe, they become a problem that needs to be edited out. October 14th, our 10th anniversary. A decade of lies celebrated in a penthouse that my words had bought. The storm outside was aggressive, clawing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Manhattan apartment. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of Julianne's expensive French perfume, and the metallic tang of ozone from the lightning hitting the conductors nearby. Julianne was wearing red. Fitting, I suppose. She poured the wine with a steady hand. A 1945 Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle that cost more than most people make in a month. She raised her glass, the diamond on her finger catching the dim light of the chandelier. "To our success, Elias," she said. Her voice was like honey over broken glass. "To the final chapter." I watched her eyes. That's the thing about being a thriller writer. You become a professional observer of human micro-expressions. I saw the way her gaze flickered, just for a millisecond, toward the balcony. I saw the slight tremor in her left hand as she set the bottle down. I've written that exact scene a dozen times. In chapter 12 of The Silent Widow, the protagonist does the exact same thing before she pushes her lover off a cliff. I took a sip. I knew the taste of Digitalis. I'd researched it for 3 months for her second book, Heart of Foxglove. It has a faint, bitter, metallic aftertaste that most people mistake for the tannins in a heavy red wine. I felt the first cramp in my chest before I even finished the glass. My heart began to stutter, missing beats like a broken engine trying to turn over in the cold. It was poetic, really. She was using my own research to kill me. She wasn't just taking my life. She was plagiarizing my death. As the world began to tilt, and the edges of my vision turned a bruised purple, she leaned in close. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for her phone to call 911. She just watched me, with the cold, clinical patience of an editor. cutting a redundant sentence from a manuscript. "Thank you for the final chapter, Elias," she whispered into my ear. Her breath smelled of wine and betrayal. "The world is going to love the story of the grieving widow who found the strength to finish her husband's last unfinished masterpiece. It's the kind of PR money can't buy. You're worth so much more to me, dead than alive." I let myself fall. I hit the mahogany floor, my lungs burning, my heart screaming. I watched her through half-closed lids as she calmly walked to the sink, rinsed her glass, and then began to set the stage. She ruffled her hair, smeared her mascara, and practiced her scream in the mirror. It was a hell of a performance. But Julianne made the one mistake every arrogant villain makes in a mid-level thriller. She underestimated the narrator. She assumed I hadn't seen the ending coming. But a writer, a real writer, always knows his own tropes. I had been microdosing activated charcoal and specific antitoxins for 6 months. I knew she was slipping it in. I knew the poison was coming. I had turned my own body into a fortress of resistance, while she was busy picking out her funeral outfit. To the world, Elias Thorne was a tragic headline. To Julianne, I was a ghost safely buried under 6 feet of lies. But in reality, I was living in a 12-square-meter basement flat in the grayest corner of London. The walls were damp, the air tasted like soot, and the only light came from the blue glow of a laptop screen. I spent 6 months in that purgatory. I watched her through hidden cameras I'd installed in her penthouse before our anniversary. It was a fascinating study in human vanity. I watched her drink my 50-year-old scotch to celebrate my demise. I watched her invite her lover over, her publicist, a man named Marcus, who had the personality of a cardboard box and the ethics of a vulture. But the best part? I watched her try to write. Every night, she would sit at my desk, my vintage typewriter staring back at her like a judge. She would type a sentence, then delete it, type another, then scream and throw her glass against the wall. Without me to build the bones, her prose was flabby, hollow, and pathetic. She was realizing the terrifying truth. She wasn't a writer. She was just a mouth. And the mouth was starving. She was desperate. Her publishers were breathing down her neck for the posthumous masterpiece she'd promised. She had already spent the advance on a yacht and a villa in Tuscany. She was on the verge of being exposed as a fraud. That's when I decided to send her a lifeline, or rather, a noose made of gold. I sent an anonymous package to her private P.O. box. No return address, just a flash drive and a single note. The ending you couldn't write. On that drive was a manuscript titled The Last Witness. It was, without a doubt, the most visceral thing I'd ever produced. It described the murder of a ghostwriter by his wife in such haunting surgical detail that it made my own skin crawl. I knew her ego wouldn't let her pass it up. She thought it was a gift from a fan or perhaps a secret admirer. She didn't care where it came from. She polished it, put her name on the cover in gold foil, and told the world it was her magnum opus. She was so greedy. She didn't even notice the character names in the book were anagrams of her own dark secrets. The night of the launch arrived. The Royal Library was a cathedral of wood and ancient knowledge, the perfect place for a sacrifice. The creme de la creme of the literary world was there, sipping champagne and waiting to hear the genius read from her new book. Julianne looked radiant. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my basement flat. She took the stage, the cameras flashing like 1,000 tiny lightning bolts. She looked at the audience with that practiced, humble smile that had fooled millions. "This book," she told the crowd, her voice trembling with fake emotion, "is my heart. It is the story Elias would have wanted me to tell." I was in the back, hidden behind a marble pillar, wearing a waiter's uniform and a prosthetic scar on my cheek. I had replaced the reading copy on her podium with a special edition. As she opened the leather-bound book, I signaled my contact in the tech booth, a hacker I'd met in the London Underground, who owed me a very large favor. She started to read. At first it was fine, but by the third paragraph, her face turned the color of ash. The text on the page had changed. It wasn't the manuscript she'd memorized. It was a transcript. "Thank you for the final chapter, Elias." Her own voice began to boom over the library's surround sound system. The audio from our anniversary night filled the hall, the sound of the wine being poured, the sound of my body hitting the floor, and then her cold, clinical laughter. The audience went silent. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. The only sound was Julianne's recorded voice, describing how she was going to use my death for PR. She looked up, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. That's when I stepped out from behind the pillar. I walked down the center aisle, the light hitting my face. The room gasped. It was like watching a man walk out of his own grave. I didn't say a word. I just watched as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The sound was more musical than any symphony I'd ever heard. Julianne is currently serving 15 years for attempted murder and fraud. Her fans have turned into her harshest critics. Her books are being pulled from the shelves. The brand is dead. The mask is shattered. And me? I kept the penthouse. I kept the royalties. And for the first time in my life, the book currently sitting at #1 on the charts has a name on it that I actually recognize. Elias Thorne. But here's the thing about stories, my friends. They rarely end when the hero gets his revenge. I told you I survived the poison. I told you I microdosed to protect myself. But what I didn't tell you is what happened to Marcus, her lover. You see, the police found his body 2 days after Julian's arrest. They ruled it a suicide. Grief, they said. But remember what I told you at the beginning? I've spent 10 years crafting the perfect murders, and I still have a lot of ink left in my pen. Justice is a beautiful story, but a sequel is always more bloody. Welcome to The Last Witness. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when the ghost finally stops writing and starts acting. I'll be seeing you very soon. After all, I know where you live. I wrote the script, remember?